What's up everyone, welcome back to the channel and to another 3D model. This week we're going to be making a camping trailer. So let's not waste any time, let's just dive right into it. So as you can see, I not only wanted to create an old camper, but I wanted to create a small little camping scene. So I quickly jumped on Google Images to find some references. Now here are a few of the references that I gathered, and if you're interested in finding any of these, I just searched old camping trailers on Google Images, so you should be able to find all of these on the very first page. But I thought it'd be a lot of fun to make a little camping scene and add a few different objects around my trailer. And of course, with Christmas just around the corner, I thought it'd be a lot of fun to throw a Christmas element into it, so I decided to add a few Christmas lights on the top of my trailer. Now, almost always on this channel, I underestimate my models. I feel like I come up with these ideas and I want to add all these objects, and I totally forget about the lack of time that I have to invest into it. Now, I only had around a day to get the modeling done, so halfway through the modeling, I realized I probably shouldn't have added so many objects, so I had to just simplify a lot of them to get it done on time. So we will go over this more later on in the video when I cover all of the UVs, but that's definitely something I just wanted to point out. I definitely had to simplify a lot of these objects, and I feel like if we had more time to invest into them, we could have made them a bit more detailed and probably a lot more interesting to look at. That being said, I'm still really happy with how it turned out, but I really wish I had more time to invest in this one. So like every model, it's gonna look pretty awful for a while. While we block out all of those main shapes, it's gonna look pretty rough. But what we need to do is just stay motivated, and as we slowly work on these shapes and refine them, hopefully it will start to look a little bit better and more like our reference. Now, this reference image was the main reference I was trying to work towards. I really liked how busy and messy the whole scene looked, and I also really liked how the whole camping trailer was a little bit beaten up and a little bit used and worn out. I didn't want anything to be brand new. I wanted this one to be a little bit more used, like someone's been using this trailer for quite some time now. And I'm not gonna lie to you guys, it was really difficult to keep myself from adding more objects into my scene. I feel like the more I started Googling camping equipment, the more ideas I had, like adding a picnic table, adding a backpack, fishing poles, a canoe. Honestly, there's endless amount of objects you can add to really make it interesting to look at. One of the most difficult things about this week's video was honestly just choosing when to stop. I could have easily spent all week adding objects, so it was really difficult to try to simplify things to get done in one day. Now, one thing I am going to do to help speed up this whole process is to not worry about getting everything perfect right away. In fact, I really find that can really drag out the process, and by the time you're adding in more objects in your scene, you have to go back and rework some of the original objects you were working on. So to avoid any of that extra work, I'm not going to worry about dialing anything in right away. I'm just going to focus on blocking things out and start filling up my scene with different objects. Now, I'm not gonna lie, this can be really difficult. It's hard to let go of a certain object when you know it's not finished and moving on to another, but just keeping that in the back of your head that you're not finished with it, you're gonna come back and rework it. You just need to start populating your scene with objects, and then you can start refining those objects later on. And that's what I'm gonna do throughout this whole video. I'm not gonna worry about getting everything perfect. We're just gonna roughly block out these shapes, and then we're gonna come back to it later on and refine them. And hopefully this will help me save a lot of time on my 3D modeling process. Oh, and don't forget, if you're interested in seeing this full video in real time, which also includes the full UV mapping process, it will all be available on my Patreon page, which you can find in the link in the description below. And I also upload all the working files like the Substance Painter file and the 3D model, so if you want access to any of those additional files, you can find them all on my Patreon page. And my Patreon page is also the best way to help support my art. If you like these videos and you want to help support my channel in a bigger way, my Patreon page is the best place to do that. And also, if you enjoy watching these types of videos and you find them at all helpful, please consider subscribing to my channel. Alright, let's just continue blocking out all of these main shapes, and let's slowly start piecing together our little camping scene. All right, so before we jump into those UVs, I just quickly want to give a shout out to this week's video sponsor, PCBWay. PCBWay offers a variety of services ranging from PCB production, sheet metal fabrication, injection molding, 3D printing, and much more. You can quickly upload your own files and get a quote immediately. So if you're building something at home or want to print one of your own 3D models, PCBWay makes it extremely easy to get custom parts for your projects, even if you don't have the necessary tools. They take care of everything so you can get those parts shipped directly to your front door. So if you're working on a project or need 3D printing or any of these other services, make sure to check them out in the description below. And once again, thank you PCBWay for sponsoring this week's video. All right, so here is the camping trailer in its finished form. Now there are a few small things I decided to add on the very last minute when I was basically doing all of the UV mapping. And one of the main ones was this tiny little Starlink. I just thought it'd be fun to add one small object, basically that would just help you get internet access while you're out in the bush. And I thought it'd be fun to add a tiny little Starlink on the top of my camper with a little cord that goes through this door since it's kind of halfway or partially open. And another small detail I decided to add was basically more lights. I originally had gaps between all these and I thought it'd be more fun and more interesting if I added more lights. So I just basically duplicated another light in between all of my original lights just to make it look a little bit more busy and more colorful when we lit them all up later on in Substance Painter. Other than that, everything else is basically the exact same. So what I decided to do for the textures was split this thing up into 4 different groups for the 4 different textures I have applied. Now, of course, there's no specific reason for 4 textures. I just thought it would be fitting. I didn't want to go too crazy and have like 10 textures. So I thought 4 would be fitting for a scene like this. So on the very first group and texture is basically the body. So the main trailer shape itself, and one of the main important things with this was making sure that my UV shells were fairly straight. Now that's always important, but because I was planning to put some paneling effect on these walls, I needed my UVs to be nice and straight. Otherwise, if they were warped, you would really see a warping pattern in that pattern and it wouldn't really be able to work. So I need to make sure that all of my shells were nice and straight. And another really important thing I decided to do was add a UV cut. So if I select these UV shells, you'll see that there's this whole wall split up into 3. And I was planning to have 3 different colors, and I thought it would make my life much easier if I can just apply this to different UV shells later on in Substance. So by adding a cut in these areas, it would just make applying that material very easy for myself. So I had to make sure that the front here and the side were aligned. So I had one cut that matched up with the sidewall, and same with the other side. Since these two aren't technically sharing the same UV space, I had to make sure that these lines were also nice and straight, so it looked like that orange color that was in the strip would follow along the front and the side, and the back as well. And as you can see here, I just made a tiny little gap between them just to help avoid any bleeding in those materials from going over into each other. So I always like to just separate them the tiniest bit. So that's probably the most important thing with this main texture here, was making sure that these 2 side walls in particular were nice and straight. Everything else is pretty straightforward. Just try to take advantage of all your UV space so you can get the most out of your textures. So the second group and texture, it's basically the windows and the door and the drapes. Now this probably could have been combined into my body texture, but I just wanted to get a bit more out of the resolution in those final materials, so I decided to split this off into its own group. But as you can see, I definitely had a bit of extra space here I could have worked with. So I feel like this isn't the best. I feel like this is, yeah, like I said, wasted space, but it is what it is. And the third group and texture is basically the tires, the frame, all the Christmas lights, and the back little pole here. Now, an important thing with this texture group was making sure that all of my lights were separated. So I had different lights with different colors. How big these shells are is really not important since there's not going to be too much detail. I just need to add an emissive texture to it to make them glow, make them bright later on in Substance. So I wasn't worried about making the UV shell really large. I just needed them to be separate so I can easily apply a color to them. So all the same colors are overlapping. So if I find These two, for example, they're both red or some similar color. So they're just stacked on top of each other. That way I can just really quickly apply a material to them, and I don't have to apply a material to every individual light, just the specific different colors. And everything else is basically pretty straightforward. Just made sure that my UV shells were nice and straight so I could really take advantage of this real estate that I have in my 0 to 1 space. That way I can get the most out of my textures. And the last group and texture is everything else in my scene. So all the small little objects. And I feel like I'm a broken record, but basically trying to make sure that my shells are nice and straight. Once again, filling up the UV space to take most advantage of that space. And another really important thing for these wood pieces, just make sure those shells were straight. That way when I added that wood grain material, they were just nice and straight along the wood piece, and they weren't be like diagonal or all warped and looking not accurate to its true life form. I wanted it to look realistic or somewhat realistic, so making sure those shells are nice and straight will go a long way in doing that for you. Now, one of the biggest things or issues I have with this model is how simplified a lot of these shapes are. And there's definitely a few in particular I would go back and rework, but if you just look a little bit closer into a lot of these objects, like this, for example, I don't even know what it is. It's like a barrel of some sorts, but it's really simplified. I did not have a lot of time to invest into these. So like this beer case, for example, just really low poly. These steps are just simple rectangles. A lot of these wood pieces are just simple rectangles. So if I could go back and rework this, I would definitely add more detail into these objects to make them look more interesting. And probably the biggest one out of them all, if I could go back and rework anything, it'd be the roof. If you look at these roof components, it's honestly just a cube. Same with these ones, just a beveled cube. And I feel like there's a lot more detail we could have added on the roof. Maybe a cool ladder that went up the back so you can actually walk up here, and maybe add like a different pattern on the top, like some metal that you can stand on with a tiny little, like, I don't know, one of those little bars that help things from falling over the side. I just feel like the roof is something that I could have spent more time on, and also the front. There's really nothing going on the front. Maybe a little stand here to help hold this little visor or thing up. I don't know. I feel like there's more we could have added, but due to the lack of time that I had, I really had to simplify these shapes. And looking back now, it's just something that I guess bothers me a little bit. I feel like we could have done a better job with a lot of these objects, but it's just the way that it goes. We don't have a lot of time, so we had to cut corners and just simplify a lot of these. Now, that being said, I'm still really happy with how it turned out, but if you are following along with this video, I would definitely spend a bit more time making these components look a bit more interesting, maybe more technical looking, like there's maybe more bevels or extrusions in them, more shapes, maybe a pipe or two, or different wiring components. I don't know really how these vents or these AC units work, but I'm sure there's a lot more detail we could have added into these by just searching up some more reference on Google. Anyways, that is how I prepared my camping trailer for Substance Painter. So now I just need to add a material to each of these folders so we can have 4 different textures in our texture set list in Substance Painter. We just need to export this and jump over to Substance, and we can start our texturing. All right, so now jumping over to Substance Painter, we can go ahead and load in that FBX file from Maya. Now, when it came to the textures, we are going to basically use this specific reference as my main reference. And this was the goal I was kind of working towards. I really liked the look of this whole camper, how it was all used and abused. So I wanted to replicate that look on my model. Now, luckily, every material I use, except for the bark on my tiny wood pieces, I did find that bark on the Substance Materials website, which is actually free for anyone to download if you're paying for Substance Painter. So just log in and you should be able to access all of these materials. But everything else besides this specific bark material just comes with Substance, so it should be fairly easy and straightforward to follow along. Now, just like the modeling process, we're not going to worry about getting everything perfect right away. I say this in almost every video, but we're just going to start filling in all of these empty meshes with some sort of material, and then we can come back and start refining them and reworking them. And I find by doing this, it can save you a ton of time on texturing. You'd be surprised, actually. If you just focus on getting everything perfect right away, you can really drag out the whole process, and you still usually have to come back and start reworking some of those original materials because things look different once everything is textured in your scene. But by not worrying about getting everything perfect, we can just save a lot of time by just filling in these meshes and then coming back to them later on and reworking them. And I'm not gonna lie, this can be very challenging, and it's always challenging for myself to leave objects alone knowing I'm not happy with them or knowing that they're not finished. But it always saves me tons of time, and I'm sure it will for you. So try it out, just fill in objects, don't be emotionally attached to them, knowing you're gonna come back and refine them later on. And trust me, it's the weekend. I do not wanna spend my full day texturing this thing, so we're gonna try to save as much time as we can. Now there's one more thing I wanted to quickly talk about was dirt and grunge, and on a model like this, if you look at my reference, there is a lot of dirt and grunge and rust going on, and it's really important to add those elements to make it look a lot more realistic. Now I often find a lot of beginner artists when they're starting to add dirt and grunge to their objects, they just tend to add a lot of just one specific type of dirt and grunge. And if you look at a lot of objects out there in the real world, there's lots of stuff going on, and it's not one specific dirt and grunge that's going on. There's almost different types of materials that are layered on, so different grunges, different roughness values, different scratches, maybe some fingerprints. There's really endless amounts, dust particles. There's so many different layers of dirt and grunge you can add on top of each other. And by doing this, you can really make objects feel and look a lot more realistic. So for anyone out there that's fairly new to Substance, what I recommend you doing is just very subtly start adding on your dirt and grunge. Almost add a little layer of dirt that's barely visible, or little bits that are just around the corners, then add another fill layer with different grunge on top of that, and kind of keep stacking and layering on these different materials, and I often find you will get a much more realistic result, especially when you're working with roughness values. So if you're looking for ways to improve your materials, try it out. Try adding maybe 4 or 5 different dirt and grunges on top of each other, but not too strong. You don't want them to be overpowering and really distracting from the actual model itself. Sometimes it's nice to add different roughness values or dirt and grunge values that are only visible from specific angles or only when the light's hitting it on a certain way. You don't want it to be crazy overpowering, or sometimes it can take it away from your model and look a little bit unrealistic. So just approach it slowly, really don't rush to get that dirt and grunge on top. Trust me, you're gonna get way better results if you just slowly layer them on top of each other. So that's what we're gonna do throughout this whole texturing process. We're just gonna quickly fill in these objects with some sort of material, and we're gonna come back and start refining them, and actually spend quite some time near the end of the video just adjusting colors or jumping into my renderer to see how things are looking and jumping back out and tweaking things. I kind of do this thing at the end of my videos where I jump back and forth between the editor and the renderer, just tweaking things until I'm happy with the results. So let's start doing that. Let's start filling in these objects with some sort of material, and we can slowly start texturing our camping trailer. Now don't forget, this full texturing process will be available in real time, which you can find on my Patreon page, which will be linked in the description below. Alright, and that is everything. That is the full 3D modeling, UV mapping, and texturing process that I did to create this old camping trailer. I really hope you guys enjoyed this week's video, and if you did, please consider subscribing to the channel or liking this video. And if you want to help me out in a bigger way, please check out my Patreon page. This full video in real time, which includes the full UV mapping process, will all be available on my Patreon page, along with all the working files. So if you want access to any of that, you can find it all in the link in the description below. And as always, I want to give a massive thank you to all of my Patreons. I really can't thank you all enough for your continuous support. So thank you so much for supporting my art. All right, I hope you all have a great week, and I hope you enjoyed this week's video, and I will catch you in the next one.